Hey everyone, Chat Sematary is back. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and I am joined today by Drew Dietsch. We are talking all about the 2014 movie Big Driver. This is a Lifetime TV movie, actually, and before we dive in, I just want to give a content warning here. This story does dive into a rape revenge story, so if for any reason you do not want to listen or watch this movie, I don't blame you. Go ahead and turn it off here, but Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and to spoil some of the behind-the-scenes workings of Chat Sematary, I was not actually slated to do this episode, but I kind of jumped in, and part of the reason I did was because I had no idea this movie existed. I have not read the novella, the story that this comes from Full Dark, No Stars, and I had no idea that a Lifetime movie had been made from a Stephen King story. Adding on to that is that it's a Lifetime movie that stars people like Maria Bello, Olympia Dukakis, Ann Dowd, Joan Jett has a supporting part in this. It was immediately very interesting to me, all of these factors. And then as horrific as it might sound, what also intrigued me was the fact that I looked up what the synopsis of the story was. And this is, to my knowledge, and obviously you would be the expert in this pairing here. To my knowledge, this is the only kind of straightforward rape revenge story that Stephen King has done, or at the very least that they've made a movie out of.
Yeah, there have been stories where people have either had abusive husbands or abusive fathers and things like that, but none of them have really been a rape story in this sense where the victim takes control and gets her revenge. You know, the closest thing I can think of really is Rose Madder. You know, she has an abusive husband and he beats on her and things like that, and then he gets what's coming to him in the end, but it's a different tone, I think, a little compared to this. And this was one of the stories in Full Dark, No Stars, and honestly, quite a few stories in that were a little tough to read just because of the content in them. And I think this one, you know, kind of reflects that the most just because of the fact that they don't shy away from showing how brutal the rape is in the adaptation.
No, I mean, obviously it is confined by the parameters of being a television movie, but you know, this came out in 2014 and it's living in a post-Walking Dead world, and The Walking Dead did a lot for laxing restrictions on what kind of content, especially in regards to violence, could be seen on cable television. And yeah, I mean, Big Driver, it's the core of the story, and so it's impossible to skirt around it or anything. And what intrigued me when you asked if I could do this episode, other than the many other things I mentioned, is that the idea of Stephen King doing a rape revenge story in the mold of what is really kind of almost an outdated approach to this subgenre, because the rape revenge subgenre is very prevalent in film. You know, there's notorious examples like I Spit on Your Grave, Miss 45, Abel Ferrara's movie is actually a fairly good one, but they are all intense, they are all dark, they are all difficult subject matter, and that's certainly here in Big Driver. And as someone who has not read the story, I was watching it and I was like, I feel like this is probably a pretty faithful adaptation, because as a rape revenge story, it's fairly straightforward. It is, that Maria Bello is playing this author, Tess Thorne, who writes a bunch of parlor room mysteries, and she's going to a book signing, and the person that runs the book signing tells her a shortcut to avoid the highway on the way back. Through that shortcut is how she ends up meeting her assaulter. And then afterwards, she at first decides to conceal the fact that the assault happened to her, and that she's going to she's going to find out who this person was and enact the revenge herself. And it's like, if this wasn't a Stephen King story, if this was just some exploitation movie from 1978 that was doing this story, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I get it. The approach to the assault and everything is horrific as it should be. There's nothing, titillating about it, which would be the case if this was made in 1978. And all of that's like, okay, straightforward. It's not super inventive in the subgenre, but okay, it's got good actors doing it, and Stephen King obviously knows how to structure a story and create compelling characters. But the thing that I think really turns this into something that I don't even know if I can qualify it as a binary good or bad decision. It's just weird, is all of the Stephen King-isms that start to seep into the story. For example, of course, the lead character is an author. That's no big surprise there. But the thing that starts getting weird, and we had talked about this because I wanted to know what went on in the story. This does happen in the story, is that she decides to, kind of figure out who this person is herself. And along the way, it's revealed that she is talking to different imaginary figures in her life. One is her GPS called Tom, and Tom starts speaking to her even before her assault, which is weird. When she drives up to this, she runs over some boards, and it's revealed that these boards with nails in them have been planted by her assaulter. When she pulls up to this gas station to get out and try and fix it, the GPS says, "I don't like it here." And immediately I was like, okay, all right, that's weird. And then that continues throughout the story as she is bouncing dialogue off of her GPS, and then eventually an imaginary embodiment of one of her lead detective character in her novels. And this is where it's like, oh boy, the Stephen Kingery is happening. And I, like, in another story, I would be like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff he's used to doing, and for certain stories, it's fine. That's his thing. But for this particular story, it throws a lot of stuff into it throws things into an off-kilter world that feels wrong for this particular story.
And they do hint at all of this stuff that is probably going to happen fairly early on. When she leaves for her speaking engagement, you see all of the ladies from her book in the window as she's backing out of the driveway. But you kind of think that's just where they live. It's kind of like they live with her. And then she goes out and does her thing as an author and comes back, and her characters are just kind of there waiting for her, for her to start working on the next book. But with the portrayal of Doreen by Olympia Dukakis, it's just one of those grandmotherly figures almost, or, given Tessa's age, maybe a motherly figure. But you really have this sense that she's been working on these characters for so long that they've become a part of her. And one thing that's in the story that they don't really show here too much is how often she talks to her cat as well, which, I mean, okay, people talk to animals, but in the book or in the story, the cat talks back, or the cat's voice talks back in her head. And it's more like the Tom relationship, with the GPS. And I think where that kind of falls flat is the fact that they're making it seem like she was a little unstable to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a read of the movie that says, well, that's just her quirky author thing, is that she lives alone. She really only has her stories, and the only quote man in her life is her GPS Tom. So, and he's there to serve her totally. And we all understand that it's like, look, these are conversations she's having with herself, not even necessarily in a, is she crazy way. It's like, yeah, okay, I understand that. However, when you throw in the crux of the story, which is that this guy, who we only know as Big Driver, has set up this trap for her, which, I mean, that's a whole nother thing that we're going to get into, and has assaulted her, and that she doesn't know who he is. She's not going to report it to anybody because immediately after her assault, when she is left for dead in this drain pipe, she's walking back and getting into town and stuff, and she continues to think about, well, if I tell people what happened, like, it's going to be in the news, it's going to destroy my career, people are going to say I was asking for it, all of, like, and this is from what I understand in the story, and it's clear that King is trying to talk about the completely unfair stigma that is applied to female victims of sexual assault, and how there's all this burden of proof, lobbed on top of them, and how there is, the idea of slut shaming in culture and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm not saying that those aren't topics that are worth exploring and worth really diving into, but it's not really what King is interested in. It seems to me that what Stephen King wanted to do with this story, and what the movie ends up doing with the story, is to craft a rape revenge film where the protagonist is able to get revenge and then pretty much paint the assaulter and his, for lack of a better term, social circle as completely unrepentant, dehumanized monsters. Because we do find out that this was a trap laid by Big Driver, and it turns out that the woman who had held the book signing that she went to, and this is played by the always welcome and always excellent Ann Dowd, is Big Driver's mother, and she specifically sent her on that route to get attacked by him. And when this is first posited in the movie, because it's, she gets back and she's able to get back and she doesn't tell anybody that she's been attacked or anything, she starts doing her detective work, and she starts saying, like, she gave me that direction to go down that way. Was it a trap? Maybe she's his mother. And I was like, okay, she's like spiraling, because I thought it was going to go in the direction of, she's a detective writer, so she's always looking for the bigger mystery, and there's always got to be some kind of conspiracy, when really it will be revealed that that's not the case, and that will hammer home that these kind of acts of assault are not some conspiracy. They are just horrible things done by a horrible person. It's an act of chaos. That's not the case. All of her suspicions are confirmed completely true by the end of the movie. And it's like, I don't know how I feel about that.
It's almost like King is giving her a little too much power. Not that it's undeserved by any means because of what she went through, but writing a detective novel or, murder mystery stories does not make someone a detective.
No, it does not.
And it felt like his rationale was just, well, she writes about these things. She's probably done her research. She might as well just be able to do the job too. And you have the way that she's finding these addresses, and considering how kind of middle of nowhere Big Driver and his place is, you would think it wouldn't even be like information available on the internet, kind of. It's like people live out in that kind of area for a reason, and it's not to be easily found.
Right. No, I mean, absolutely. The other thing that really it taints the story for me, because I'll say, we'll talk about this as a film, since I had not read the story, and from what I looked up, this is a pretty extremely faithful adaptation of the story. The other thing that taints the story for me is the fact that because she talks to all these imaginary figures, and because we see her having straight up hallucinations in relevance to her assault afterwards, unfortunately, it creates an unreliable perspective character, and Tess should not be that. Obviously we're going to sympathize, empathize with Tess and be on her side. And the point of rape revenge stories is we want to see the revenge. Like, that's what the subgenre is built around. Okay. But the fact that she continually has these hallucinations or, imaginations calls into question her believability as a perspective character. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that what takes place in the movie that is presented as reality is not reality. I believe that what is presented to us as true and taking place in the real world took place. But by sowing these seeds of a character that has such a wild imagination that outright fabricates things, and it's not like she's sitting there like, ooh, I'm imagining this. It's like, no, she straight up has hallucinations about these things. It means that her judgment and what is happening after a certain point in the movie can be called into question. And I think that's the worst element of this from a writing standpoint. Is like, no, we should not be questioning anything that she is doing or anything that she is discovering. Everything that she is finding out and everything that is happening to her should be absolutely irrevocably real. And by having her have conversations with her GPS, at certain points she sees dead people talking to her, arms are jumping out of her medicine cabinet mirror in her bathroom to try and grab her, all this kind of stuff. It immediately is it's going to allow anybody out there to be like, well, did any of it really happen? And it's like, oh, yes, it did, but you're totally fine in making that argument because the story has given you plenty of ammunition to doubt anything that she perceives.
For me, the only thing that really saves that is the fact that they show these things happening before having her recount what happened to her. If this was just a straight, here's this character, this thing happened, and we're relying on her memory only and not actually having seen the events, it would be even more unreliable. But from a character standpoint, to portray her that way, it did feel like a bit of a disservice to the character. And for me, what made this really feel like a Lifetime movie, and this is actually something that was in Salem's Lot, there were a few scenes that had voiceovers where she's just talking and you're kind of watching other things happen. And I would have preferred to just, have her doing something that would kind of make more sense for the voiceover. When she was typing into her computer and reading what she was typing, that didn't bother me quite as much. But in the Salem's Lot remake, that was something that stood out to me, and that, same director on that. But there were just moments like the dead guys talking to her where you were like, oh yeah, this is a Lifetime movie.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to the source material in that regard and how much of that is taken over, but it does. I think it just compromises the character in a way that, like I said, I can get past that compromise and be like, no, I totally buy into what is being presented as real, and I believe that. But it's just it's a piece of ammunition that other people seeing it should not have, to be like, okay, now she's crazy, I can't believe anything that she's doing. And it's like, well, it's not really a good tactic to take for this particular story that's being told. But obviously, again, a lot of what we've been talking about is from the story perspective. But then there is the aspect of this being a movie. And like you said, a Lifetime movie. And that certainly interested me because as much as it's kind of, I think, a derided term, Lifetime movie, meaning it's very soapy and trashy and all this kind of stuff, Lifetime has been in the business of making horror for decades. It's just a very particular market of horror.
Yeah.
And this is a horrifying story. And I've not seen an entire Lifetime movie in probably over 20 years. So I was curious to check it out. And you mentioned the director, Mikhail Salomon, who is very prolific, is the cinematographer on movies like The Abyss and Backdraft and a personal favorite of mine, Arachnophobia. directed the 1998 movie Hard Rain with Morgan Freeman and Christian Slater, and is a prolific TV director. And I'll say, as a movie, as a piece of filmmaking, I thought Big Driver was pretty good. I think it's a pretty good. The opening title sequence immediately sets up a very interesting mystery in which we see a body in this drain pipe, and we later learn that yes, Big Driver has done this to multiple women and then dumps their bodies in this drain pipe. So that immediately was like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Interesting setup. For a TV movie, I think it looks fairly good. It's not a poor looking movie. And most importantly, and I think the thing that probably, I don't want to say saved, but the thing that helped this particular story get told as well as it could be is the casting. I think the casting of this is across the board great.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because we had seen Maria Bello before in Secret Window. She wasn't obviously the focus of that, but she was in it enough, and I thought she did a nice job with that role. So I was surprised to see her in something else, because while there are a lot of people who are really into, returning to Stephen King adaptations, clearly, I never really thought of her as the person who would be in this role when I was reading through the story. And, I did have the DVD long before I read the story, but it just never clicked with me that this is what the story was going to be. So I was really enjoying her performance throughout this. And, like you said, Ann Dowd, always pleasant to see her in anything. She's very hateable in a lot of things, I might add.
For what she has to do, because eventually it is revealed that, yes, the mother is the one who did this, and Maria Bello tracks her down to her house and busts into her house in the middle of the night and intimidates her and eventually ends up killing her. That whole sequence is asking Ann Dowd to take a character and again just turn the evil switch on, where it's like all of a sudden she is just this absolute snarling monster, and it's like, yeah, as written, this is actually pretty corny, but this is why casting is so important. You get Ann Dowd, and all of a sudden it's like, look, I'm buying it because she's great. And if anything, I think Ann Dowd's so good that she undercuts the intention of making the entire Big Driver family nothing but, unrepentant, dehumanized monsters, because she gets in a fight with Maria Bello, and Maria Bello ends up stabbing her, and she's slumped over on the floor, and she's got a knife in her stomach. She's like, help me, you have to help me, please. And I was like, oh yeah, that's why you cast Ann Dowd, because I'm like, I feel bad for this person in this moment because she's acting really well. Not because of the writing, not at all, but it's because Ann Dowd's so good at making herself look pitiful in that moment.
She's so good at manipulating your emotions when you watch her on screen, and I felt very similarly to her in The Leftovers.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, I really want to hate her, but she's just messing with my head so much. And that's really a moment where she's able to shine in this, I think, too. And, Olympia Dukakis, who has been in so many things that I can't even list them all, but, a lot of people know her for Moonstruck and recently passed away, unfortunately, but she was just like this nice sort of warm presence.
Oh yeah, I mean she's playing the Miss Marples, or people might know the Murder She Wrote kind of character, like very proper, very shoulders up and everything, which of course then leads to the whole reason to play it like that is so that when she does things that seem very out of character for that, it's kind of intended for humor. I don't think humor was necessarily something that this story needed, but it goes for it, particularly towards the end. But yeah, I mean, she's absolutely great. There's a small supporting performance by Joan Jett, who she's the owner of this bar that Big Driver dumps Tess's car at after he believes he's killed her, because it'll get towed away and then forgotten about. So she goes to pick up her car, and she ends up having this conversation with Joan Jett's character, whose name is Betsy, and she's still, this is I think the day after her assault, and Betsy looks, it's like, yeah, I know you've gotten beaten up by somebody, and Tess throws it off as like a boyfriend. And then Betsy tells a story about how she was abused when she was a child, and how it eventually ended up to her losing an eye, and talking about, how you have to stay strong. And like, I with these kind of stories, with rape revenge stories, there is the desire to have a feminist angle of like, let us get back at the patriarchy, at men who have abused us either physically or, emotionally or just socially, and let's rise up against that. However, the majority of these stories, and one of the reasons why I don't think they totally work a lot of the times, are coming from totally male perspectives. The stories written by Stephen King, the script, this was another interesting facet that made me want to check this out. The script is written by Richard Christian Matheson, the son of Richard Matheson, one of Stephen King's direct influences as an author. And the director of the film is a man. And I'm not saying that you can't make good stories like this from men, but I think that it's the kind of thing that has been so dominated in fiction by men that we need more women to be making stories to have that particular perspective. I would recommend the French film Revenge by Coralie Fargeau. That is a rape revenge movie, and it is written and directed by a woman, and it is shocking how different of a movie it is in the subgenre, and it's a very good movie. And so, these moments of Joan Jett trying to, because the last shot of the film, it feels like it was inserted at the last minute.
Yeah, it really does.
Is Joan Jett's character calling Tess and just saying like, you got him, girl, or something. I can't remember what the exact, but it is like this very like girl power, #girl power moment, where it's like it feels really false. Like it feels unearned, and it feels like it's trying to smack the audience over the head on the way out of like, remember, this was a feminist movie. Like, and it's like, oh, okay. Like, but it was all made by men. So I don't know, like, how truly feminist it could be. And it's unfortunate because obviously the intention is good in what they want to do, but and the women that are asked to perform are all performing extremely well. But at the end of the day, I don't know, it was always going to come across as trashy because unfortunately the rape revenge subgenre is kind of trashy by design. It's just something that is difficult to transcend, which is why everybody listening should go watch Revenge on Shudder, because it was able to do that. It's able to transcend that. And I feel like, yeah, this is a trashy movie. And I say trashy, and I'm not saying trashy is a value statement. It's not, trashy does not necessarily mean good or bad. But in this instance, it's, this is very, for Stephen King, this certainly leans into his pulpier roots and his pulpier interests, and doing that with a rape revenge story is immediately going, like, it just feels very outdated for his body of work.
Part of me wonders if this made him want to dive into the detective sort of genre more, because we have the Bill Hodges trilogy that comes after this with Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. And I'm on Finders Keepers, so I haven't read all three of them, but you can tell he's wanted to experiment with styles over the years and genres.
Sure, yeah.
A lot of people know him as a horror writer. They think of The Shining, they think of Pet Sematary, It, Salem's Lot, those kind of horror
supernatural
stories.
Horror.
Right. But for me, where he really shines is with his character work and making these characters feel so grounded. And he does accomplish that with Tess to some extent. But like we mentioned earlier, there are some issues with the way her character is written. And because of this adaptation being so faithful to the source material, it does show here. And even though it's a Lifetime movie, it was better than I expected, honestly. I was kind of expecting something that was over the top and the acting was just not super fantastic, because I have caught Lifetime movies here and there, and every time I watch them I'm like, wow, the writing is horrendous.
Well, I will say, in the cast, if there is one weak link, I would actually say it's Will Harris as Big Driver, or Lester, as he's eventually credited as.
Who is technically Little Driver.
Right, yes. They don't really make that clear in the movie,
Correct.
But I understand that that's better revealed in the story.
Yeah, it is.
We should talk about that, because that's another facet where I think this story could have actually been more interesting than it ends up being, is that Tess does all this detective work, and she is rewarded with, like, yes, it was his mother. Like, this was a big plan that they set up. And then she goes and stakes out his place, or what she believes to be his place. And she's there. She's got her gun. The truck's driving up. It's the truck that was there when she was assaulted. This is him. And she imagines in that moment walking up to him, seeing him be scared, shooting him, and being like, yeah, I got him. So in that moment, she walks up, she shoots him, and it's revealed, oh no, it's his brother. And this was another moment where I'm like, yes, this is an interesting turn of events. This is, again, calling into question her reliability. Now, directly, it's saying that all of your detective work does not apply to the real world, because it just doesn't. And then, of course, he has to start speaking to her as a dead person, and she's, absolutely distraught. She's like, I've killed an innocent man. I'm like, this is interesting. This is a good piece of conflict to have this character involved in. Only to find out that, no, don't worry. The brother was also assisting in these continued serial assaults. He was taking pictures. He was possibly assaulting them as well. And it's like, don't worry, you killed that guy and it's all okay, Tess. Nothing to feel guilty about. And I was like, man, it just feels like King wants to give every possible out to Tess as a character. To be like, don't worry, everything you're doing is totally cool and great. And it's like, I don't know. That's a weird position to put the character and us as an audience in.
So in the novella, if I'm remembering details correctly, she does a little more legwork on finding out his identity, because we have that scene at the gas station where she walks up to the semi and gets the name and the address of the place. And in the novella, she calls and finds out that there are two of them, that there are two brothers who drive the same truck. So when one comes home, the other takes the truck out, kind of thing. They switch off or something along those lines. So she is aware of the presence of a brother that way. Whereas in this, I think she just reads about the father's death.
I think she just sees a photo on the wall of the two of them. That's it. Like, that's the only, I think from that photo, she gets the particular truck stop or whatever to scout when she's trying to follow them. It's there. The fact that there is a brother is all there and everything. But the idea, again, that it's like, we have to make the brother complicit in these assaults so that this murder that she committed, she's like, nope, okay, my hands are clean, my conscience is clean, I killed a bad person. And it's like, honestly, I think if the brother would have remained innocent and she still went and got her revenge, on her assaulter, I think that would be a more interesting, complicated direction to take the story, where it's like, look, you got your revenge, but in doing so, it cost an innocent person. It's the classic, dig two graves thing with revenge, where
right.
It's, dig one for yourself and one for the person you're revenging against. It's like, yeah, you had to become a monster to kill a monster, but she's not. Like,
yeah. They also do give her a slightly different way out. The end result is the same, where she finds out the brother was involved, but in the novella, she writes out a confession thinking she has killed an innocent man and she's going to take her own life and all of this sort of stuff that just doesn't exist at the end of the movie, because we do get that, phone call from Betsy, and it's just a little off, in my opinion. It's like, we've come so far and this is how you end it, but they do still give her that same out. But in the novella, she finds her purse.
Okay.
Not all of these photos everywhere.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it is what it is as far as that goes. And there's certainly, my biggest takeaway from it was like, this is a story he wrote in recent years. Like, in all honesty, the Stephen King story it reminded me the most of was Rage. Like, it feels like a young man's story, like attempt at making one of these things, like I'm going to make a feminist rape revenge thing and she's going to get revenge and it's going to, everybody she kills is going to get it, be, guilty of it. And all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, it doesn't feel like a story that should be written by like a 60-plus-year-old man at the time. Like, it feels like something. Like if it had been revealed, like, oh yeah, he wrote like an idea for this on like a card and filed it away back in 1970, 76, and then he dug it up and decided to do it. Like, this makes total sense. Like, I totally understand why this is like some old idea that he dusted off from decades earlier. But as far as the movie is concerned, I think the movie it's okay. Like, I think it's not poorly made. It's well cast and well acted. Being a Lifetime movie, of course, it being a TV movie, I should say, it has manufactured commercial breaks where you'll just cut to black.
Yeah.
Which are like, oh, yeah, okay, time for a commercial, which are always jarring and weird. But it's not a poorly made movie. The story is what it is. If anything, it should be commended for being as faithful an adaptation as it is. That I think is not usually the case, especially with a lot of Stephen King stuff.
Especially with the TV stuff, I would say, too, just because of the limitations of what you can and can't show.
Right.
And oftentimes there are definitely graphic scenes in Stephen King novels. And, we've seen over the years with Carrie how you have theatrical releases versus, a TV version that came out in 2002. And it's just like a totally different mood almost because of those limitations that you have. And, I don't know what the state of Lifetime is at the moment and what they're allowing on air, because it seems like Lifetime is kind of one of those channels that is in limbo because they don't have a streaming service really, but they're kind of trying to revamp things to appeal to either a different audience or, just kind of shift, like you said earlier, how the men were the villains and now the women are kind of like the villains in some of their movies. And I thought it was interesting, though. I'd probably give this, I gave it a 3 out of 5.
So I mean, we talked about that off the record. So I will state that as somebody who is, grown up with Lifetime movies in the pop culture, when I was growing up, in the 90s and stuff, Lifetime movies were always, it was, crazy stepdads, crazy boyfriends, and in recent years, it has become more about like crazy babysitters, psycho prom queens and stuff like that. And women have played villains. So in all honesty, with Big Driver, it's kind of more of a return to form for Lifetime for making an unrepentant, male villain. But yes, I don't know. Like, I can certainly say that by adapting a Stephen King story and by putting Stephen King's name prominently, on the marketing and with the cast that they were able to get, I have to believe that this was pitched as a more of a prestige production for Lifetime than maybe some of their other movies, that they wanted to be like, look, we got these like, notable name actors. It's an adaptation from Stephen King. Like, we're trying to, show that we're not just making TV movie of the week, soap opera drama stuff, soap opera thrillers. It's like, this is, and maybe that's part of the reason why they did this story is because like, and we're doing something that's real serious. This is serious and dark and everything. And yeah, I mean, I gave it a 3 out of 5 as well. I obviously, considering the content of it, it's going to be a no-go area for some people. Some people are just not going to watch it on principle, and that's okay. Like, it's totally understandable why they wouldn't. And for the ones that do, I think you're going to end up with, I think, a well-executed but fundamentally flawed story.
Right, and I think this one flew under the radar a bit too, because there are actually, 3 things in a row here with A Good Marriage, Mercy, and Big Driver that I had no clue even existed. And, A Good Marriage was also included in Full Dark, No Stars. But these 3, movies and TV movie here, it's just one of those things where, because of the fact that, they either were direct to video or they just didn't have as much of a budget behind them, even though I thought the casts were, relatively good for all of them, I just had no idea they existed. And I feel like there have been so many Stephen King adaptations like that over the years, in particular ones that you and I have discussed.
Oh, for sure. Well, and to be fair, I think this is just before the recent King renaissance in pop culture. Like, again, he's always been there. They've always been making adaptations. But this is before, New Line's It Chapter 1 came out. And that just absolutely, and any Stephen King project that anybody had on the shelf immediately got greenlit after that movie. And, they've been making tons of stuff since then. And
I would even argue that 11/22/63 on Hulu was kind of the start of a few more things getting greenlit. And not everything is great after this by any means. We have the Mist TV show and the Dark Tower movie, which I know a lot of people don't like either of those things. And then you have, some stuff that's kind of very mixed, like the Pet Sematary remake and It Chapter 2. But yeah, there's a huge amount of adaptations coming up here in comparison to his book output.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think now we're going to start, doesn't have anything to do with Big Driver, but in relation, I think we're going to enter another period of this where it's the downswing of a King renaissance, where it's like, all right, they make a couple movies, they're prominent, they get received well, and then a bunch of other stuff comes out that is either, discarded or not really given any attention, and it slides back into that. And then there'll be another big, they'll remake something notable, and it will be received really well, and then it'll kick off another one. Like these things come in cycles, and this Big Driver, I think, interestingly, was probably during a down period of that cycle, but in some ways, maybe because of the cast that they were able to assemble, it gave it a little bit more profile. It bumped it up a little bit. So I can't say it's a movie worth totally dismissing, but it's also a movie that's extremely difficult to recommend, not just because of the content, obviously that's a huge factor, but also because at the end of the day, it's okay. And it's like, oh, I don't really want to recommend like just okay movies. Like it's like your time's definitely spent better. But I would say if there's anything in this that intrigues you, as far as, it being a Lifetime movie or the cast or anything like that, I would say if there's any interest that you have after listening to this, that yeah, you could watch Big Driver. I mean, I think by the end of it, you won't be like, wow, I've discovered some hidden gem, but I think it will be like, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how King is adapted into different formats in different eras. Like, it's like, yeah, I mean, a Stephen King TV movie in, what was it, 1980, I believe, for the original Salem's Lot, is very different than a Stephen King movie in 2014, developed for Lifetime. I like seeing how those trends and how those things change the material and the approach to them.
Yeah, and we have, Lacey's story coming on Apple TV Plus, so that'll be interesting because that's obviously an area where they have more room as to what they can show. And even though that story is fairly different, I'm still very interested to see how Apple handles that one. And, The Stand, I still have to watch that, even though I've heard mixed reviews, which, there's mixed reviews on a lot of this stuff, but I thought this was a fine movie. It's by no means a feel-good movie at all. So, that's kind of your warning there. This is definitely tough to watch, but I don't think it's unwatchable for, film production reasons.
No, not at all. I think, especially for being a television movie, I think it is more than competent. It's, as I want to stress, it's a well-made movie, but, the content that it's making is immediately going to throw up red flags for people, and understandably so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Drew, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Big Driver with me today.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, that does it for this episode of Chat Cemetery. You can support the podcast on Patreon for $1 a month. You'll get a thank you on the show. For $2 a month, I will send you a Chat Cemetery sticker. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Chat Cemetery on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You could also rate and review the show. That's a huge help. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.